Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. This evening I will be covering the Godfathers of Grindcore, the legendary Napalm Death. I put this shirt up. I got it at a concert. I saw them back in 1992 on the Campaign for Musical Destruction. I loved the shirt so much that it is in tatters. It's falling apart. I couldn't even really wear it. It's just hanging on by a thread. I also have my old cassettes up from back in the day. So I was a huge fan back in, certainly in high school. So I guess Napalm Death, the history of the band actually dates all the way back to 1981. I have not heard those early demos, but they started out as some sort of a punk band, a hardcore punk band, and then the punk got just so much more aggressive to the point where I think they were incorporating like Slayer type things, but just going completely insane, and they developed this thing called Grindcore. It was basically the hardest hardcore punk with elements of what we know as death metal, and they just put it all together, and it was insane. And good early Napalm Death is just completely off the rails. Just a band that's just completely out of control, but that's the charm to the band. For this show, I'm only going to be reviewing I call them the first 10 years, at least the first 10 years of releases, because those are the albums that I got bought back in the day. And anything beyond about 97, anything they released in 98 and to the present, while I've heard it and am fairly familiar with it, I just kind of stopped following the band intently after a point and just kind of stuck to the earlier releases. So I'm just going to mainly speak on the stuff I know. It's almost like, had I reviewed one more album, Words from the Exit Wound in 1998, that was the last album that they recorded with Earache Records, and that kind of ended a phase. But I didn't really listen to that album, so I was thinking about reviewing it, but I think if I did, it would just probably come in at number 8. Not because it's bad, but it just doesn't, I don't have much of a connection with it. But they have basically 3 eras or phases that I'm going to talk about in the stuff I review here and the stuff they did with Earache. There's this early phase literally in the 80s, which was just completely grindcore. And then there was a phase in the early 90s that was still grindcore, but mixing in this new, death metal and a new lineup. And then by the mid 90s, they were like experimenting. They were doing all kinds of different things, and I'll get to that as well. But okay, so we'll get started in this instance based on what I'm reviewing, which is their first release in 87 all the way to their 7th release in 97. So 87 to 97, the first 10 years, 7 full lengths. So here we go. Coming in at number 1. Not number 1, at number 7. The first pick of the evening, coming in at number 7. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, and we're going to go with Scum. I don't know if you can see that. We're going to go with the album Scum from 1987. One of the first things ever released on Earache Records. Total just grindcore all the way. The songs on here are so short. I mean, I think they have 28 tracks, 33 minutes. So everything's under a minute and a half. A couple of songs are beyond 2 minutes or 3, but for the most part, everything is just super fast. 30 seconds. They have a song on the first album called You Suffer. It's 1 second. It holds the Guinness Book of World Records for being the shortest song. Siege of Power is probably the highlight on that. The song Scum is pretty cool as well. Try to get all the tracks out. Yeah, they have 28 tracks, 33 minutes for that first album. The reason I'm ranking it 7th is not that it isn't a classic. It's such a groundbreaking album and an influential album, and I love that cover. Jeff Walker of Carcass actually did the artwork for that. But it's raw and it's cool, but the songs, I mean, what are you supposed to make of a 30-second song? What do you do with that? If they get any momentum going with a riff that hooks into another one, the song ends and it's over. And you certainly can't tell anything that the vocalist is saying or shouting or growling, but nonetheless, it's awesome. It has a great charm to it. I'm a fan of it. I'm a fan of it. It's just, when you compare it to some of their other stuff, I don't think you almost can't compare it. So maybe I'm ranking it 7th, but you can't really compare it to what they did just a few years later. But on this album also, it's a tale of two halves of an album. The first 12 tracks were recorded by one lineup, which was Mick Harris, the drummer, the original drummer. The original drummer by way of Scum. I mean, they had people before Scum in the band, but you had Mick Harris on drums. You had Nick Bullen on bass and vocals. He was there from the beginning. And then you had Justin Broderick on guitars. And so they recorded this demo. Well, the demo ends up being half of Scum, like side A. Well, they have lineup changes. Nick Bullen leaves, and Justin Broderick leaves and goes on to form Godflesh. Awesome band, also on E-Rake Records. So he leaves to form Godflesh. So Mick Harris brings in Bill Steer on guitars and Lee Dorian on vocals. And then he brings in a different bass player, Jim Whiteley. So they have a four-piece for the second half of Scum, and they do even shorter songs. I mean, I think the other 16 songs total less than 15 minutes. So everything they did with the newer lineup was complete, just grindcore 40-second songs. It was insane. So so there's a little history lesson there with Scum. So coming in at number 7, I've got all the way back from '87. That's when it was released. The first part of Scum was actually done in '86, but at number 7, I have their first album released in '87. I have Scum. Okay, coming in at number 6, not a surprise here. We're going with their second album from '88. I have From Enslavement to Obliteration. So at this point, the bass player leaves and they bring in Shane Embury from Unseen Terror. He was actually their drummer, but they bring him in to play bass. So he's there with Bill Steer and Lee Dorian and Mick Harris. This album is noticeably, production-wise, it's a step up from Scum. Mine has bonus tracks on it, but I think there were originally 22 songs in 29 minutes. So again, you've got this weird industrial one, like sounds like Ministry or something, called Evolved as One to start, and that's like 3 minutes. You take that out, everything's like a minute. You're just flying through these. Lucid Fairy Tales, pretty cool. Unchallenged Hate is cool. Display to Me, the title track. Social Sterility, Mentally Murdered. So this one is definitely more memorable. Like I said, the production a little bit better on this one. I mean, the grinding and the blasting, Mick Harris is out of his mind on this. So if you like your songs short and sweet and right to the point, man, they get there real quick. So that is my pick for number 6, From Enslavement to Obliteration. Another classic in the grindcore era, 1988. These guys basically invented grindcore. I mean, Scum was basically the first grindcore album ever, a landmark album, and then they followed it right up with From Enslavement to Obliteration, which is my number 6 pick. That came out all the way back in '88. And some people that really love Napalm Death probably think what I just said is complete sacrilege, but that's all right. I just prefer a different style of Napalm Death a bit more, but I do think that this early era is pretty cool. Okay, coming in at number 5. I think I had this at 4 when I started. It's now at 5. I have their 7th album from 1997. I had Inside the Torn Apart. This was the last album I kind of followed them on. I do like this album quite a bit. This is, if you notice, the band logo is different at this point. This is what I would call that third era, whereas these two were from the first era. This is from the third era of the band. They were experimenting a lot more. They were trying different things. The productions were real modern at this point. Lots of riffs, little bits of effects here and there, trying different styles, things like that. Just what a band does when you start out crazy, but then you just evolve. I think Breed to Breed is an awesome way to open it. It sounds a lot like the opening track from the previous album. This album is very connected in many ways stylistically to the album that came out before this, in late '95, early '96. Barney, their legendary vocalist at this time, he had been ejected from the band for a short period of time between the last album and this album, but they ultimately asked him to rejoin and he accepted. This one's down just a little bit. I do like the song Section, Reflect on Conflict, the title track, If Symptoms Persist, Prelude. The Lifeless Alarm is a weird experimental way to end it. Again, they channel, sometimes they channel like this industrial, Godfleshy type style, and I do dig that song as well. It's just there are a few empty spots in here where there are tracks that aren't bad, but they just don't do anything for me. And I feel like, especially towards the second half, there's a little chunk of them, and a couple in the beginning too. So you've got 12 tracks, and I definitely dig 6 or 7 of these. But you know, there are other albums that are just excellent from start to finish, and this one is, when it's good, it's good. But there are certainly some gaps in the quality tracks. You know, at this point, I'll get to the history of the lineup later, but at this point, you've got a very vastly different lineup. In fact, nobody on this lineup by this point was involved in the Scum recordings, if that makes any sense. The band members that were on their very first album are all gone by this point. So everybody in the band at this point has replaced someone at some point in time. So I think a lot of people are down on the band at this point because they went into this third phase where they were experimenting, and I think a lot of people are turned off by that era. I'm actually not. I actually thought that was cool because as much as I like the first and second eras, bands have got to change. You don't want to keep doing the same album over and over again. And I think Scum and From Enslavement were the first era, and they were kind of similar, but they showed improvement from Scum to Enslavement. But you have to change and move into another phase of your career, and I think they did that the right way in the beginning, and I think they did that when they moved into the third phase as well. But and the reason I kind of stopped following them too is because their fourth phase, I felt like they just kind of went back to things they were already doing to some extent. So I just felt like their creative arc had kind of peaked probably by here. That's just my opinion. So there you go. Coming in at number 5 from 1997, I have their 7th album, Inside the Torn Apart. Okay, let's see. Coming in at number 4. Okay, this was the beginning of that third era. I have from 1994, I have Fear, Emptiness, Despair. So this one was, I was so fired up with the band and was waiting for this one. It came out on Earache. It also came out on Columbia Records as well, so I think they were investing money in the band at this point, thinking maybe death metal and grindcore could break through like Metallica did. Obviously it did not, but this album is confusing to me in that when it came out I was really disappointed, but I still liked it and listened to it a lot, and I think I appreciate it a little bit more now. But again, much like Inside the Torn Apart, there are gaps in the action as far as good tracks go. It starts off Twist the Knife Slowly, Hung, Remain Nameless, Plague Rages, More Than Meets the Eye. 5 tracks in a row to start it that are great, and it ends with 2 excellent ones. Look at that. Man, that is grindcore. So it starts off with 5 excellent tracks, and it ends with Fasting on Deception and Throwaway. I don't have the 2 bonus tracks on here, so I only have 11. So it starts with 5 excellent ones, it ends with 2 of them. But there are about 4 in the back half that are, okay. But again, that's probably why this is 4th. There's just a gap in the action at some point. This was engineered by Pete Coleman, who had been assisting on some of the previous albums, but the production here is a little. You'd think it would be better for the amount of money they have, but Napalm Death wants to keep it kind of grimy. They want to keep it kind of grimy. They don't want it too polished. And so they did bring in Colin Richardson, who'd been working with them. They did bring him in at the last moment to kind of remix everything and at least save it a little bit. Stylistically, this was quite the departure from everything they'd done previously. I think they mentioned they were getting into bands like Helmet and things like that. And plus, this is 94. This is the mid-90s. And if you know anything about what was going on musically in the mid-90s, things were changing big time. So Napalm Death is suddenly, they have an MTV video for Plague Rages. For the most part, that's a mid-paced, almost a slow mid-paced song. There's a lot of more groove on here and lots of like more mid-tempo things, which was a shock when I heard this because I had never heard Napalm Death play a lot of mid-tempo stuff. It was all like breakneck and blasting. And this is, you know, a little more clean, a little cleaner on the production and a little trickier too. Almost, I don't want to say progressive, but a little bit more technical, and the song structures were really well thought out on this one. So, again, I think it starts off, the first half is great, and it ends pretty strong as well. And I've come to appreciate it more, but this is the beginning of that third era. So at number 4, and this would be their 5th album. At number 4, their 5th album that came out in 1994, I have Fear, Emptiness, Despair. Okay. At number 3, this is historically rated the lowest album ever by Napalm Death. So the fans do not care for this album. And yet, I love this album. It's probably their most experimental album. I have from 1996, I have Diatribe. I love this album. It's 12 awesome songs. 12 songs, all awesome. And that's true of these final 3 albums. But they're experimenting. They're using these phaser effects on the guitars. I think Mitch Harris, the guitar player, had a lot to do with the writing on this. I think Greed Killing's awesome. Glimpse of the Genocide, Right for the Breaking, Curse to Crawl, Cold Forgiveness, My Own Worst Enemy, Just Rewards, Dogma, Take the Strain, Diatribe, the title track, Placate, Sedate, Eradicate, and Corrosive Elements. I love this album. It's groovier, it's more experimental, lots of atmosphere and effects. It's got the most color of any of their albums. It's, in my opinion, it's the most creative one. It's, dare I say, a little progressive. I mean, they do all kinds of cool things, and it grooves, and I think everything on here works for me. They even did an EP that came out in late '95 ahead of this that has other cool songs as well that I'll hopefully talk about a little bit later. Produced by Colin Richardson. I think it sounds excellent. Back in the day, I had this promo cassette of it before I got it on CD, but yeah, this is regarded as the fans' least favorite album. They're like, it's the least Napalm Death. They reject it. They hate the stylistic turn. They weren't necessarily huge fans of Fear, Emptiness, Despair that came out before this, and at this point they were hating it. And at this point, I'm loving it because I like to see this band that's creative and talented keep moving in this direction, at least at this point. So I was a huge fan of this album, still am, and when I was reviewing these, I probably listened to this the most. Not because I didn't know it that well, just because I enjoy listening. I enjoy listening to this album. I think it's great. Is it all grindy all the time and like old Napalm Death? Not really. But does it? I mean, it's just a band continuing to evolve. Again, big fan here of the album. Oh, another thing. This might be the only album they've ever done. No song under 3 minutes. So no short songs. Everything's 3-4 minutes. Which for them, they cover a lot of ground in 3 minutes. So these songs are, the formats and the song structures are awesome. It's got hooks, it's brutal, it's experimental, it's grooving, it's just got everything. You name a type of rhythm, they just do all these tempo changes and all kinds of rhythms on there. So, big fan of the album. At number 3, the one the fans hate, the one I love, I've got their 6th album from 1996. Diatribes. Okay. My number 2, and this is where I'm going to start with the history lesson here. My number 2, I have their 3rd album from 1990. We're going with Harmony Corruption. Harmony Corruption. This is where I got on board with the band. I don't know if you can see the band photo there, but this is a new lineup. This is almost completely different from the album before it, which was called From Enslavement to Obliteration. At this point, here's the history lesson. At this point, Bill Steer, who was already in Carcass, leaves Napalm Death in 1989 to just focus on Carcass and specifically this album. Lee Dorian leaves, the vocalist leaves, to form the slowest doom band of all time, at least for this album, Cathedral. And in comes Barney Greenway of Benediction. I don't know if you can see it. He was on their first album. So they bring in Barney of the death metal band Benediction to do vocals. They bring in Jesse Pintato of the American Grindcore band Terrorizer, which featured members of Morbid Angel as well. They bring in Jesse Pintato on guitars, and eventually they bring in Mitch Harris, who was in Righteous Pigs, Grindcore band out of Vegas, and also had done a side project, Defecation, with Mick Harris, the drummer. I don't have any of those albums with me, but I can tell you that Mitch did do a project a couple of years later called Meat Hook Seed with the guys from Obituary, but that's for another day. That was just an excuse for me to show that. So there's your history lesson. So you get guys leaving for Carcass and Cathedral, also on Earache Records, and then you got guys coming in from Benediction, Terrorizer, and Righteous Pigs and Defecation and all those bands. So needless to say, Napalm Death was a great breeding ground of talent for the label. I mean, guys left that band and came in from that band and created all these different projects. So you've got a different band. This is the beginning of a second era, because this is vastly different from the first two albums that were complete grindcore. This is grindcore meets death metal. They got a lot of riffs. They go to Morrisound Studios in Tampa, Florida to be produced and engineered by Scott Burns. So it's just got the classic death metal touch to their grindcore. These songs are much longer. I mean, you got a couple that are under 3 minutes in the 2 minute range, but most of these are 3 and 4. A couple are 5 plus. So this is where I get on board. This is where I am interested, because it's got more of that death metal feel. It's got more of that musicianship, more of the cool formats and the songs that go places. I know Mick Harris was not pleased with this album. He thought that Scott Burns killed it with the death metal Morrisound touch. He compressed too much and made his drums sound like they wouldn't sound if they played live, and all things like that. But I disagree. I mean, I understand what he's saying, but no way. This album's great. If the Truth Be Known, Malicious Intent, Unfit Earth, which has guest vocals from Glenn Benton and John Tardy, Circle of Hypocrisy, The Chains That Bind Us, Mind Snare, Suffer the Children. That's the first song I ever heard from him. I think that might have technically been my introduction to death metal or grindcore anyway. It was a video on Headbangers Ball. It came out way back, 90. I didn't even know what I was watching. It was just hard to comprehend, but so this is just an absolute, just an absolute landmark album. Like I said, this is where I got on board with the band and death metal, grindcore in general. I think it was literally, it was this, and while I was trying to process it, then other stuff started rolling in, like, Obituary and Deicide and Death, all the others. But this may have been my first real exposure to the extreme forms of music, extreme beyond Slayer. So just a big fan of this album. I thought maybe it was going to be number 1, but when I did the review, it's definitely my solid number 2. Huge fan of it back in the day. You've got a grindcore band, but they're switching out their guitar player for 2 guitar players who are riffing it up. Both Americans too. I don't know if it had anything to do with the guys who were from the West Coast, they were Vegas and LA, but they came in with their American riffing. And then you bring in Barney, who's already a death metal vocalist from Benediction. So there you go. At number 2, classic, got Harmony Corruption from 1990. This is their 3rd album. So there, only one remains here. At number 1, their 4th album from 1992, and the album that I think epitomizes what Napalm Death is all about. The production, the tone, the writing, everything. I have Utopia Banished. I don't know if you can see, that's the cover, but it's so worn out on my shirt. I saw him on tour in 92, like right after this came out. I got to shake Barney's hand. It was awesome. That show left an impression on me that stays to this day. But I think after some of the fans backlashed on Harmony Corruption, it was a little too death metal. This is back to a good balance of mostly grindcore, but still has a little bit of the death metal that I like, so it's still kind of riffy. And the songs aren't all a minute and a half, they're mostly like 2.5. Like, you've got 15 songs, 39 minutes, so you're basically talking most songs are 2.5 minutes. Well, that's enough to get something done when you're Napalm Death. But it starts out with a weird industrial thing, and it ends with a weird industrial thing, and all in between it's just an incredibly brutal grindcore. Also, Mick Harris at this point had left Napalm Death. I think he was just kind of fed up with the way the band was going. I think he preferred what they were doing in the beginning with Scum and Enslavement to Obliteration. I think he was pretty hacked off about the style of Harmony Corruption. And so eventually he bows out. They bring in Danny Herrera, one of Jesse Picato's buddies from California. But again, we heard Dementia Access earlier, Upwards and Uninterested, The World Keeps Turning, Cause and Effect Part 2, Got Time to Kill, Exile, Awake to a Life of Misery. This album is just super brutal. Super brutal. It's my favorite one. It's off the rails, but it just stays together just enough. So it's just an absolute gem of an album. So that is my number one. So to rank them real quickly again here, at number 7, I have their debut from '87. I have Scum. At number 6, I have their second album from '88, From Enslavement to Obliteration. At number 5, I have their 7th album from '97, Inside the Torn Apart. At number 4, I have their 5th album from '94, I have Fear, Emptiness, Despair. At number 3, I have their much maligned, but one of my favorites, their 6th album from '96, I have Diatribes. At number 2, I've got their 3rd album from '90, Harmony Corruption. And at number 1, an absolute classic for me from '92, their 4th album, Utopia Banished. Also, what's great about this Utopia Banished copy I have, it's got 5 videos, so 5 music videos. Then you've got Live Corruption, Live at Solitary, June of 1990. I mean, the vibe, you can just pick up on the vibe. Kids are jumping up, stage diving left and right. You know, Napalm's playing the stuff off Harmony Corruption, but a ton of the stuff off Enslavement and Scum. It's just insane. It's just an insanely awesome period in time for that kind of music and for the band's career. Also, it has the Grime Crusher tour live in Nottingham, November of '89. What's cool about that is Harmony Corruption is not, so they're playing all the grindy stuff from the '80s, but with Barney on vocals and Jesse Piccato on guitars. Mitch Harris hadn't joined just yet. Bill Steer was out of the band, but he's at the show because he's playing guitars for Carcass, so it's pretty wild. But those videos are just so classic. Diatribes, before it came out in January '96, this came out in late '95, and it had, it's called Greed Killing. It had the song Greed Killing and the song My Own Worst Enemy, which appeared on Diatribes, so we kind of knew what we were getting ready for. But it also has this awesome song called Self-Betrayal, which we heard earlier, which has influenced me. I'm just so inspired by how they were using kind of like noise and atmosphere and stuff, and then they have a couple other tracks, Finer Truths, White Lies, and Antibody, and All Links Severed are more grindcore. Probably wouldn't fit as well with the actual album, so they're on this EP, and this is very cool. So this is an awesome, thing to go along with Diatribes. So if you like Diatribes at all, man, you've got 4 more awesome tracks on here. And then last but not least, this might be my favorite album they ever did, but it's a compilation album. It's a compilation of EPs. But Death by Manipulation, 1991, it's got this like 9-minute EP, Mass Appeal Madness, with Pride Assassin as a song, a re-recording of Unchallenged Hate from Enslavement, and a re-recording of Social Sterility from the Enslavement album, with Barney and with that 5-piece lineup. It's also got the Suffer the Children single EP, which has the song Suffer the Children, which you already have, but it has a cover of they redo Siege of Power from Scum, which is awesome. And there's a spooky horror movie soundtrack called Harmony Corruption, which they open their shows with on that tour. But here's the cool thing. The final 6 tracks are with that classic 80s grindcore lineup from the 80s with Bill Steer and Lee Dorian, Shane Embury and Nick Harris. It's my favorite stuff. This is better than Enslavement Scum because they go to Slaughterhouse Studios with Colin Richards, and the songs are longer. They're not a minute. They're 2.5. Almost 3. The last one's 4 minutes. So they were starting to branch out in their writing right at the end before Bill Steer and Lee Dorian left. Plus, with Colin Richardson, you can actually hear all the guitars. And you can tell Bill Steer, who's writing at this point, is really getting pretty talented. He left the band at that same studio right after this to go right back into the studio there and do Symphonies of Sickness from Carcass. So pretty cool history there. But this is probably my single favorite Napalm Death release, just because it's got that nice variety of Harmony Corruption, right after Harmony Corruption, and the best stuff that they did in the 80s with that first era and that first basic 4-piece lineup. So, big fan of Death by Manipulation. So there you go. I think that covers it. The cassettes, I had Death by Manipulation, Harmony Corruption, Utopia Banished. That's pretty much, for me, that's pretty much my favorite era of the band right there. I stuck in Diatribes as well. I saw them live. I think I saw them again during Diatribes. And I think at the Gates open for them. I think that was in the Galaxy. I think it was 96. But anyway, just an incredibly cool band. They are the inventors, the Godfathers of Grindcore. So there you have it. That is ranking the first 7 albums, the first 10 years of releases of Napalm Death. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.